Welcome back today to our 5-minute Bible study, and we are talking about Judges chapter 9 today. There's a free PDF on our website that you can download. There's a link down in the description. These Judges chapters are dense. There's a lot of stuff in them, and they've made it really hard for me to keep them under 5 minutes. This might be another one that goes a little long, but I'll do my best. What judge are we going to talk about in this chapter of Judges? Well, we're going to talk about Abimelech. We'll meet him in our outline and in our characters section. Let's talk about the win, our timeline. The events of the book of Judges are generally placed by most scholars between the years 1450 and 1000 BC. There's a little bit of debate exactly where they fall within that time period, but most scholars place it in there. They've definitely covered several hundred years. Where did these events happen? Well, chapter 9 specifically mentions Ophrah. That's where Gideon and his family were from. Jotham is one of Gideon's sons who makes an address to the people of Shechem at a place called Mount Gerizim, which we've talked about in the past. And then Abimelech, this judge that we're going to talk about, he's going to die at the end of the chapter in a place called Thebes or Thebes, not exactly sure how to pronounce it. Now let's talk about our characters. We are going to briefly talk about Gideon. He was the 5th judge of Israel. He died in the last chapter, right? But he's very relevant to know about in this chapter because it's mostly his kids that we're going to be talking about in this chapter. Then Abimelech, he's our judge. He's the son of Gideon and one of his concubines. Remember, Gideon had 70 sons, so he's one of those 70. And he's usually counted as the 6th judge of Israel, although there is some dispute about his judgeship because he was not a particularly godly man, but usually he's counted. Jotham was Gideon's youngest son, and then a guy named Gaal. He was a man from Shechem who rebelled against Abimelech's rule. So now that we know our characters, let's jump over to our outline and talk about how they fit into the story. In our first section of this chapter, we're going to talk about Abimelech being made king in Shechem. This is verses 1 through 6. So Abimelech, the son of Gideon, he went to the men of Shechem and he convinced them to make him their king. He said, "You don't want to serve under all of my brothers, just make me your king and I'll take care of you." You remember Gideon, the people offered to make him the king, but he said, "No, I don't want that." But Abimelech's like, "Yeah, I'll take that offer." So he goes to Shechem. He convinces these men to make him their king. They give him 70 pieces of silver, and he goes out and he hires reckless men with these 70 pieces of silver. And what does he do? He kills all of his brothers, right? All 60 some of the other brothers. He kills them. What a terrible guy. Only Jotham, Gideon's youngest son, managed to escape. Section number 2, verses 7 through verse 21, is Jotham's parable of the trees. So when Jotham learned that the men of Shechem had made Abimelech their king, he went to the top of a place called Mount Gerizim, and he spoke to the men of Shechem. He told them this fable, or this parable, which is definitely kind of unique in the scriptures. The parable was about the trees trying to find a king to rule over them. The trees went to the olive tree, and they asked the olive tree to be their king. And the olive tree said, "No, I don't want to be your king. I'm busy producing olives. That's my work. I don't want to be king." They went to the fig tree. They asked the fig tree if he'd be king, and he gave a similar response. "I'm here, I'm making figs." Then they went to the grapevine. The grapevine didn't want to be their king either. So finally, they went to the thorn bush, and this worthless bush accepted their offer, and he became their king. Jotham was comparing the actions of the men of Shechem to the actions of the trees. The house of Gideon had been full of honorable men, but the men of Shechem had selected the worthless brother to lead them. Our final and third section is a long one, verse 22 through 57. Shechem is destroyed and Abimelech is killed. Abimelech ruled as king for 3 years, but God sent an evil spirit to trouble the relationship between Abimelech and the men of Shechem, who had made them the king. The men of Shechem shifted their allegiance away from Abimelech to a new man in town. This guy's name was Gaal, the son of Ebed. Gaal plotted to overthrow Abimelech and to make himself the king of this area, but his plot was leaked. Abimelech was tipped off and he set an ambush during the night, and when the men of the city woke up, Abimelech's men attacked, and Gaal fought against them, but he was unsuccessful. He lost. The next day, Abimelech attacked with his men again. He destroyed the city, and he sowed the land with salt, which causes nothing to be able to grow in the soil. The last stronghold of the city was known as the Tower of Shechem, and the leaders retreated there as a last resort. Abimelech went and he set the tower on fire and killed 1,000 men and women that were inside. He then went and fought against the city of Thebez, and that city also had a tower. And while they were fighting, a woman in the tower threw a millstone down, and it hit Abimelech in the head and crushed his skull. As he was dying, he asked his servant to take a sword and to kill him so that his legacy wouldn't be that he was killed by a woman. Ironically, now thousands of years later, we're here talking about him being killed by a woman. So that plan didn't really work out very well. So that's how Abimelech died. When the men of Israel learned that Abimelech was dead, they just stopped fighting and they all went back to their homes. And verse 56 tells us, quote, "Thus God returned the evil of Abimelech, which he committed against his father in killing his 70 brothers." And so that is Judges chapter 9, kind of a dumpster fire. But now for our application. Do not be sloppy, desperate, or impatient when selecting leaders, because the outcome can be devastating. This chapter is really a case study in bad leadership. It's all over the place in this chapter. When bad leaders are given control, it's difficult to get them out of authority once we've given them the opportunity to lead. Now, this is an important lesson for the church, I think, in the modern day. And I suspect that this is part of the reason why God's standards for elders is so high. It's better to wait patiently for qualified men to become available than to appoint a thorn bush as your king, as your leader.